Okay, so things are moving fast,
Meh.
really fast. You blink, and the whole landscape shifts. Today, we are diving into a whirlwind of events, and we're basing this deep dive on a recent Midas Touch broadcast. They really laid it all out. There is so much going on right now, and it's changing by the minute.
It really is. And when you start looking at all these seemingly separate events, I mean, both here in the US and around the world, a pretty clear story starts to emerge.
Okay, so let's unpack this story because our source brings up several different threads. And the first one that really jumped out at me is this whole war plan text leak situation. It just
Yeah.
keeps escalating. And there are all these allegations of a cover-up, too. This thing has some serious momentum.
It does. And what's really interesting is how the initial reports about these leaked texts, they've kind of become this bigger discussion about how the administration is reacting. Our source points out this kind of disconnect. It's like what they're saying publicly doesn't quite line up with the evidence that's coming out. It really
Yeah.
makes you wonder, like what exactly is in those texts and why is there such a pushback?
Right. Our source even quotes this line about rejecting the evidence of your own eyes and ears, which is a pretty powerful image. It really captures this clash between what's being presented and what might actually be happening. Okay, shifting gears a bit, let's look at the domestic scene. The Pennsylvania special elections. Democrats did pretty well, huh?
They did. The source highlights Democratic wins in a district in Lancaster County, and that's traditionally been a Republican area. They also won a state Senate seat that hadn't been held by a Democrat in, well, over 100 years. So, tying this back to the bigger picture, these wins raise an interesting question. Could this be a sign that voters are shifting, maybe reacting to the current political climate and all these crazy events we're seeing? It's kind of like a potential early indicator of the mood of the electorate.
It's fascinating. And speaking of reactions to the current climate,
Hmm.
the source refers to it as the Trump regime, but anyway. Their planned trip to Greenland seems to have hit a wall. Apparently, the locals weren't too thrilled about the idea. And this is where it gets really interesting. What was behind this strong local resistance?
Well, the source indicates that the trip was canceled because Greenlanders organized this, like massive protest against Usha Vance, J.D. Vance, and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz visiting. What's particularly interesting is the reason they're giving for this protest. They're claiming that not a single Greenlander was willing to host them in their homes. That was supposed to be part of some PR thing, but there was just this unified nope from everyone. That level of resistance really speaks volumes, don't you think?
Absolutely. It shows a community that is standing strong together. And the ripples internationally didn't stop there. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had some strong words about the new auto tariffs that are being thrown around.
He did. The source quotes Prime Minister Carney, and he basically suggests that Canada needs to seriously rethink its relationship with the U.S. He implies that Canada might not see the U.S. as a reliable partner anymore, and that they're looking at forming economic alliances with other countries. Now, considering the historically close ties between Canada and the U.S., a statement like that is a pretty big deal. It makes you wonder what the long-term impact might be, both on trade and just overall diplomacy.
Wow. So these tariffs could have some major ripple effects, not just on the relationship with Canada, but potentially on the entire automotive industry.
Definitely. The source even mentions concerns about consumer confidence taking a hit in the U.S. and the possibility of a recession. When a major trading partner like Canada voices these kinds of concerns and hints at a strategic shift, it raises these crucial questions about the broader economic and diplomatic fallout from these policies. It's like, watching a major power play in global politics.
It really does make you think. Now, let's circle back to domestic politics. Elise Stonick's nomination for UN ambassador, that was withdrawn. And the reasoning behind it seems pretty strategic, politically speaking.
Right. The source says the nomination was pulled because the GOP got nervous about potentially losing her House seat in a special election. And get this, they describe it as a plus 21 or so Trump district. That means Trump won that district by a pretty comfortable margin in the last election. The fact that they're even considering it vulnerable now really underscores how much things could shift in the coming elections. It's just another sign of how unpredictable the current political scene is.
Yeah, it really highlights the uncertainty when even what are supposed to be safe seats are suddenly up for grabs.
Yeah.
Okay, last but not least, our source touches on some, well, frankly, disturbing reports about asylum seekers. They're alleging that these people are being detained in what they're calling El Salvador concentration camps.
This is, without a doubt, the most concerning issue raised by the source. They detail allegations of lawful asylum seekers, these are people who followed the legal procedures to enter the U.S., being detained and sent to El Salvador. And what makes it even more troubling are the alleged reasons for their detention. things like having tattoos. It's hard to even imagine what kind of impact this is having on these people.
It's truly awful. The source gives some specific examples, and they're just heartbreaking. A baker with an autism awareness tattoo, a musician from Venezuela with no criminal record, a gay hairstylist. These aren't just numbers, They are real people with stories. They were looking for safety and a better life. It really brings home the human cost of all this.
Absolutely. The details they share really paint a picture of a blatant disregard for due process and basic human rights. The source emphasizes that these individuals entered the country legally and have clean records, which makes their alleged detention even more alarming. These stories really stay with you. They force you to think about the human consequences of these policies.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From the war plan scandal to these unexpected election results, the pushback we're seeing from Greenland and Canada, and then these very concerning reports about asylum seekers. What do you think are the big takeaways here? What is the overall story that these events tell when you look at them together?
Well, the source really seems to be suggesting that there's this pattern of recklessness and disregard for established norms coming from the Trump administration. We see it in the casual way they allegedly handled sensitive information in the war plan situation, the terrorists that seem to be alienating allies, and then how they are reportedly treating asylum seekers, seemingly bypassing legal and ethical boundaries. There's also this clear pushback happening internationally. Countries like Greenland and Canada are seemingly drawing a line in the sand. And on the domestic front, those shifts in voter sentiment that we saw in the Pennsylvania results and the uncertainty around that New York House seat, those suggest that maybe the public's perception is changing. It's almost like a series of interconnected stories, each one highlighting a different aspect of this larger theme.
It feels like we've only just scratched the surface here, but these initial observations from the source material give us a really compelling snapshot of what is clearly a very fluid situation. And it gives us a lot to think about as these stories continue to unfold.
I agree. Each of these threads, the questions surrounding the war plan texts, the resistance we're seeing in Greenland, Canada potentially changing its economic course, and those truly disturbing accounts from asylum seekers, they all give us a glimpse into the complexity and the potential consequences of the current political landscape. They're all part of a bigger story that is still being written.
So to wrap up this deep dive, it's pretty clear that these events that we talked about, they're not just isolated incidents. They seem to be connected, pointing to a broader pattern of behavior and the consequences that come with it. Would you agree? It feels like there's a consistent narrative running through all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the war plan scandal, when you look beyond just the leak itself, raises some serious questions about how the Trump administration operates. This whole hooey PC small group and their seemingly casual approach to potentially classified information, it really makes you think about their security protocols and decision-making processes.
And then you have the strong reactions from international partners like Canada and the unexpected defiance from Greenland. It really does seem like the global dynamic is shifting in response to the administration's foreign policy approach. These aren't just minor diplomatic stumbles, they feel more like a fundamental reevaluation of those relationships.
I think that's a good way to put it. And back home, the results of those special elections in Pennsylvania and the nervousness around that Republican House seat in New York definitely suggest that voters might be changing their minds. This could be the beginning of a much bigger story about how the political landscape is evolving.
And finally, we can't forget about the deeply disturbing allegations about the treatment of asylum seekers. Hearing those individual accounts, the baker with the tattoo that represents something so important to him, the musician seeking refuge, the hairstylist just looking for a safe place, those stories bring the human cost of these policies into sharp focus. It adds a really sobering element to this whole narrative.
It really underscores how important it is to look beyond the headlines and understand the very real impact these policies are having on people who are just looking for safety and a better life. These aren't just abstract political debates. These are real people with their own stories and vulnerabilities. Their experiences are a crucial part of the larger narrative that's unfolding.
So taking all of this into consideration, all these instances where established norms seem to have been disregarded, the strong reactions both here at home and around the world, it really makes you think about the long-term implications. What does this mean for the U.S. and its standing on the world stage? And maybe even more importantly, what is our role as citizens in all of this? How do we hold those in power accountable for the information that comes to light and the actions they take? This story is still being written and we need to pay attention.
I couldn't agree more. This interconnectedness of events brings up some really fundamental questions about the nature of governance and the responsibility that comes with power. The stories we've explored today, they're a powerful reminder that we need to be vigilant, think critically, and remain deeply committed to accountability and transparency in our civic life. It's a story that's still unfolding, and how we engage with it matters.